resulted in a book called Working with Truman, a personal memoir of the White House years of Ken Hechler. Margaret Truman even said, "I enjoyed Ken Hechler's book very much. It brought back a lot of wonderful memories." And you got favorable reviews from Walter Mondale, William Proxmire, the New York Times Book Review. Talk a little bit about Harry Truman.
I lucked into this job working with Truman because I was teaching at Princeton University, and one of Truman's staff, a fellow named George Elsey, had been a graduate of Princeton, and I asked George to come up to the class and describe exactly how Harry Truman came out of nowhere, defeated Thomas E. Dewey, who had been favored by all the polls and all of the political experts. Clark Clifford was a particular friend of mine because one of his staff named Clifford Curris, who told me one day, he said, "You've been talking about my uncle. I was named after him. That's my first name." Organized a trip to the White House, and we talked with Clark Clifford, who said, "Would you boys like to meet the president?" And you know how students are. They all say, "Yeah, yeah." So President Truman came in and talked with us and my students. When it got to me, he said, "Now, you professors, you teach a class or two a week. You have the whole summer off, and obviously you got a lot of extra time on your hands." And I said, "Yeah, that's right." And he said, "We have a lot of things we'd like to do here at the White House. Could you help us out?" And I said, "I'd be honored to do that." So he gave me several assignments, and they were apparently so well researched that he said, "Why don't you just come to work for us full time?" That's how I got onto the Truman White House staff. I just lucked into it. But I wrote this book from the standpoint of the challenges which a president faces and the way in which they were coped with. And Truman, of course, I think was a great president because he wouldn't allow anybody to take a poll before he made a decision. Too many politicians these days have to lift a wet finger to the air before they will make a decision. But Truman said a poll might give you a temporary snapshot of public opinion, but it doesn't tell you the difference between right and wrong. And that was the moral compass of Harry Truman. He always wanted to know is how just to the majority of the American people is this proposal, rather than how popular it is. Well, I was in Europe in the Army when the Hiroshima and Nagasaki occurred, but it was a no-brainer for Harry Truman because we had reached an impasse in our negotiations with the Japanese, and there was one thing that President Truman could never say publicly. We had intercepted the Japanese code, and we knew exactly how strong they were how many kamikaze pilots they had trained, and the strength of the Japanese army that was in Manchuria and other spots in the world and was called back home to defend the homeland. It would have been a terrible slaughter if we had had to invade Japan, which was the only alternative to the dropping of the bombs. And if you consider that if we had invaded the homeland and at a cost of over 250,000 American lives that had been estimated, how would the families of those 250,000 have felt toward Harry Truman if they knew that he had an alternative to save those 250,000 lives? He probably would have been impeached had he not done what he did. Well, naturally, he was in the forefront of the critics of Senator McCarthy, and he supported every possible effort to bring to light the damage that Senator McCarthy was wreaking on our American personnel. And he was very critical of President Eisenhower for his hands-off policy toward Senator McCarthy, and always felt that President Eisenhower was dragging his feet when he should have been in the forefront of the fight, which finally Margaret Chase Smith was able to articulate in her Declaration of Conscience.
The Supreme Court felt that President Truman had exceeded his implied powers, of which Justice Jackson wrote one of the more enduring concurring opinions. Did President Truman ever confide in you and the staff as to how he felt when he got that decision on the Steele seizure case?
Well, of course, it made him very angry, and angry at the justices of the Supreme Court who took that position. And he was, I say, several steps beyond being irked. And when Harry Truman took a position on an issue, well, you always know where he stood with both feet. He was furious.
Yeah. What was your general impression of your boss, President Truman?
I was 200% in his corner on issues, and I admired the most that he was, his moral compass, I said, was the word justice, and that's what he stood up for. And he stood up for we the people, those first three words of the preamble to the Constitution. And he fought for average people and for the downtrodden. He was a real fighter for justice, and that's what I admired the most about him.